In the first part of our Lightroom at Lightspeed course, I'm going to show you how to import images into the Lightroom catalog that sets up the most efficient workflow. Now you can see here I'm working in a brand new catalog in Lightroom with no images imported, but you can apply many of these same principles if you're already working in a catalog. So to get started with the import, let's go ahead and access the menu at File, Import Photos and Video. If you've already worked in Lightroom for some time, the window that pops up is going to be pretty familiar to you. The left side of this window is used to show Lightroom where our images are stored that we want to add to our catalog. Now for the purpose of this course, I've put all my images into this images folder so that they'll be easy to import and keep track of. Now, one of the key things about the way that Lightroom works is these three options that we see, three primary options at the top of the window for how we can import images into Lightroom. And I think of these as copy, move, and add. Now, you may already know the differences between these, but I want to cover them real quick just in case. Now, in a copy, what we do is we take the image where it's currently stored and then also make a second copy that we're going to put somewhere else on our computer. So basically, both copies of the image exist. If we're copying from an external device like a memory card or an external hard drive, you may want to use this to ensure that both copies are preserved. Now, if we move images, that means that we're going to move them from their original location into a more organized destination. And finally, if we add images, they stay exactly where they are on the computer, but they're inserted into our Lightroom catalog. So the files are untouched, but they're placed into Lightroom itself. Now for the purpose of this tutorial, we're going to use the Move option, and I'll tell you more about that here in just a minute. So we're going to go ahead and select Move from this option up here. Now down here there's something key that we can use to make sure we don't double import images, and that's to make sure that we set ourselves to New Photos right here. If we choose All Photos, if the image exists in both locations, Lightroom will double them up. But if we just choose New Photos, it's only going to move the ones that aren't already in our catalog. The purpose of this course is to make sure that everything we do feeds into a fast and efficient workflow so that you can spend less time at your computer. One of the things that I like to do during the import is make sure all of my options are set so that when we do the edit, everything is efficient and fast. Now, the first part of this is that I like to change the way that Lightroom builds previews. Now, over here on the file handling panel, there are some different options that we have about how we build previews of our images. And those previews are what drives the editing process. When Lightroom imports raw images or JPEG images, it also builds previews that we work with within the bounds of the Lightroom library and develop modules. Now, by default, the build previews option is going to be standard, and that's not a bad option. But if you want to zoom in and out seamlessly in Lightroom so that you don't have to wait for Lightroom to do any further rendering, we can change this to one-to-one previews. Now, when we set that up, Lightroom's previews are going to take up more space, but we can discard those previews later. Now, all that the previews do is give us a way to work with our images within Lightroom itself. It doesn't change the original files or anything like that. Now, another key option that we can enable is building smart previews, and we'll talk more about smart previews later, but this is going to make sure that you can edit your images whether you're connected to the originals or not. So if your images are stored on an external hard drive or something like that, building smart previews ensures that you can continue your edit when you take your laptop out the door with you. Now next up, we can talk about file renaming and destination. And you might be wondering about how this feeds into an efficient workflow. And the key to me is that renaming our files and organizing them in a simple and clean way make sure that we can find them later, back them up easily, and in general just make them easier to work with because we know where they are and we know how they're named. So the first of these is the file renaming panel, which you can find right here. Now, you can see here my images come out of camera with very generic names. You can see here the camera's applied this DSCF and then a number and then the file extension. Now most of our cameras are set up to output images in that way, but when we move them onto our computer as part of our digital workflow, we may want to rename them so that they're a little easier to work with. So the first thing is to ensure that this rename files box is ticked, because that's going to make sure that images get renamed as they move through the import process. Now if you haven't already renamed your images in the past, you can start from right here and then go back and correct the other images later. Now, the cool thing about the file renaming option is that we have a lot of different options about how we can name our images and even set up our own naming schemes. And this is one of the parts of the workflow that I want you to consider what would work best for you and what will feed in most to an efficient workflow that works best for you. Now, on this template menu, we see a number of different options for how images can be renamed on import. Now, I have a very specific system that I like to use, but it's very simple, and it's the date file name option. Now, you can see here under the sample part down here at the bottom that the date file name option both names a file according to when it was captured and then also appends the original file name on the end. And I like this approach for a number of reasons. I like organizing photos based on when they were shot and add all the metadata in Lightroom. Now, some photographers believe that this doesn't really give them enough information in the file name. They may want to add a client name to the file itself, and that's a completely okay system if that's the route you want to go. But personally, what I like to do is just load images into Lightroom and then let the file name speak for itself. So this file name doesn't carry any meaning about what's in the photo, and I'll add that meaning through tags and keywords in Lightroom. Now, if you want to go ahead and build some custom options for how you want to name your files, we can go back to the template menu and choose some different options. So if we choose something like the custom name sequence option, you see down here that the default is something like untitled-1, but we can easily drop in our own custom text like Smith Wedding. And when we do that, it's going to name all of the images in sequence just like we've selected. If you want to get really deep into the options for how to name your images, you can go back to the template menu and choose edit. And what pops up is a complete template builder for how you can name images. Now, each of these boxes allows us to insert something different into how the images are named. And let me walk you through one example for how we can also set image names up. I'm going to go ahead and clear out what we just added. And basically what these boxes down here do is allow us to drop in various parts of the file name. So if I want to drop in the date, for example, I can choose some different date options from here, like the year, month, and date. And you can see here that Lightroom automatically drops that in up here and shows us a preview of what an image will be named. Now, after we've added that first piece, we can continue adding other naming options. So we can click Insert next to the file name and add other options about how the files are output. And we can even come back up here and add in custom characters such as a dash to break up those long file names. And again here, the key is that Lightroom gives us so many tools for how we can manage our workflow, and we can use those tools to our advantage and in a way that fits our workflow the best. And the file name option is one that's really powerful for making sure that your images are consistently named and keep our workflow efficient. And efficiency is the name of the game with this course. So I'm going to go ahead and press cancel and revert back to one of my original options. I'm going to use the date file name option. And in keeping with this same theme, we're going to scroll on down to the destination panel. Now, the destination panel is very similar to what we've just talked about, and it allows us to organize images as they get imported as far as where they're going in our file system. You can see here that I've already set Lightroom to go ahead and send images to my Mac's Pictures folder. And Lightroom down here is going to mock up the way that the images are going to be organized. So when we see these plus folders, those are new folders that are set to be created. Now, up here in my destination options here at the top, you can see here my very simple naming scheme for how I like to organize images, and that's by date. So when I choose that by date option, Lightroom starts organizing images based on the capture date, and it'll take all of these images and move them, because we selected move up here, from my original folder into these individualized date folders. Now, just like we talked about with the renaming option, there are tons of options we can use for how we organize images on a destination. So if we come back to this same date format drop down, you can see here all the different options that Lightroom gives us for how we can import. And if I switch to an option like 2014 October 26, you can see here that Lightroom starts building out a different set of folders that they would be organized into. Now, personally, my system is built around that default import option, so I'm going to switch it back to that. But again, the key here is that Lightroom is going to give us a lot of different ways about how we set up our image structure. Now, finally, one option that I find really interesting about the destination panel is this into subfolder box. And if we tick it, what we can do is basically add a named subfolder for where these images are stored. So instead of sorting them directly into these date folders, we can add a top level folder and then organize them beyond that. So if you're shooting things like events or weddings and you really want to capture it in a folder that captures the name of the event, this is a great way to do it. So I'm going to just go ahead and show you how it works. And if I enter the folder named Travels, which is where the images in this catalog are from, you can see here that Lightroom is going to drop it first into a Travels folder and then stick all of the images into those same date name folders just like we had before, but with the convenience of one top level folder that's named according to what the images are. I'm going to go ahead and untick that option because I'm not going to use it for the purpose of our tutorial, and talk to you a little bit about the last major component of the import that I like to customize. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that when we come into this apply during import panel, there are a number of settings that we can apply that we'll talk more about later. You may already know that Lightroom allows us to add presets and keywords and all kinds of things that are part of our digital edit. And one of the conveniences that we have is to apply some of these during the import itself, which is pretty cool. So during the import, we can easily apply developed settings such as a preset and apply them all as our images come into Lightroom. And while I don't necessarily recommend that because I really encourage you to process each individual image with a vision, it can be a handy option to utilize that can speed up your workflow. Now, next up, we can put in keywords like travels or 2014 if we really want to add that as a keyword. And any of the images that come in during the import are going to get those keywords. So again, the key here is that what you want to do is, if you know those keywords or those presets apply to all your images, you can just as easily add them on import. I'm going to go ahead and blank that because I don't really feel like any of that applies to the images that I'm going to be working with. And I'm going to go ahead and press import. Now when we do this, Lightroom is going to start processing the images in all the ways that we've told it to. And over time it's going to come in and move all the images, rename them, organize them like we've talked about, and then build out the previews just like we said it so that the images are ready to work with throughout the rest of this tutorial. Now this is one part that takes some time, as you can see, as my images are coming in. So if you can, I encourage you to structure your workflow in a way that you can kind of leave it after this point so that you can come back later and be ready to work.